Professor Joseph Drew again from the University of Technology, Sydney. This time I'm here to talk to you about something that's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, which is the cost of de-amalgamation. You'd all be aware that there's a proposal that hopefully will be considered by the Boundaries Commission shortly to de-amalgamate Cootamundra-Gundagai Council into Cootamundra-Gundagai Council. So what are we talking about here? I need to be quite clear. We're talking about the one-off de-amalgamation costs. They only will ever be incurred once. There's also another set of costs, ongoing costs that will go on forevermore. And there's also ongoing savings that will go on forevermore. Indeed, the ongoing savings are higher than the ongoing costs, so there will be an ongoing net saving which will go towards paying off this one-off de-amalgamation cost over time if the New South Wales State Government decides not to pay it. So, what did I do? I need to be clear that this is not guesswork. This is not the type of guesswork that was inflicted on the community by consultants in the past, where they just plucked a figure out there. I think it was 5 million, said it'll cost 5 million to amalgamate, and plucked another figure out there. You'll save 3% on staff, therefore it will reduce your expenditure by 3%. It's not that sort of silliness. This is actually proper rigorous evidence. I've gone back to source documents, I've gone back to your financial statements, I've gone back to what's happened previously to work out an overestimate for your one-off de-amalgamation cost. So this is the worst case scenario. Anytime when I had to choose between the lower of two costs, I always chose the higher cost to paint the worst case scenario. I expect the actual de-amalgamation costs will be much less. So specifically, what did I do? I looked at the costs of amalgamation. Some of those items have to be undone in de-amalgamation, so to use those costs inflated by inflation is reasonable. I looked at the cost from previous de-amalgamation. I'm one of only 2 scholars in the world that have studied de-amalgamations in detail, and I have good records of what happened in Delatite and also in Sunshine Coast Regional Council up in Queensland, and I could use those figures inflated into today's dollars to get an idea of what the real costs are likely to be. I looked at existing contracts that the council has. I looked at the circumstances of particular staff members occupying jobs. Is there a contract? If there is a contract, what is the payout figure? I received estimates for work that needs to be done by suppliers who provided the work for council in the amalgamation. I also consulted with your management and your staff. Now, as I was suggesting before, I had some guiding principles I used. One was that the cost must be specific. I must be able to point to something particular and say, this is the cost for doing X, perhaps splitting the asset register. When in doubt, when there was ever any doubt about whether a cost would be incurred or not, I included a cost. It's much better to be surprised on the upside, to be pleasantly surprised, than to be in a mess later. When I was faced with 2 or more estimates, I always chose the higher one. So an example is the ICT cost. I had costs from Delatite. I had costs from your amalgamation. I had an estimate from a supplier, estimates from your staff. I chose the highest out of that lot. It's much better to be prudent, to be surprised on the upside. The costs have to be rigorous and they have to be reliable. The last thing we want, the last thing this community needs is another disaster. So I had to make sure that these were as good as humanly possible, as accurate as humanly possible, and I almost guarantee that your costs will be considerably less than these. So what are the costs? Here they are. They come to a total of 1.75 million. Now, to give you an idea of how that compares to other costs, Delatite in 2002, the estimates for de-amalgamating Delatite was $1 million neat. In today's dollars, that's $1.5 million. So it's a little bit more than the Delatite estimate. The Sunshine Coast Regional Council one-off de-amalgamation costs, there was 3 estimates: 1.75 million, 2.175 million and 3.6 million, provided by 3 different people. None of them were right. Sunshine Coast Regional Council is not directly comparable to what we have here at Cootamundra-Gundagai. There's a couple of big differences. First, Sunshine Coast Regional Council didn't want Noosa to de-amalgamate. Second, they'd had a fire sale, sold all the plant, sold all the ICT equipment, which is huge money. So to replace the ICT equipment, $1.2 million. To replace the plant, which wasn't included in their one-off cost, it should have been $7.5 million. We didn't have the fire sale at Cootamundra-Gundagai. That's why your costs are considerably less. So these costs, just a smidgen more than what Delatite actually incurred in today's dollars, gives you another sense that they're probably going to be spot on, in fact a little bit over. So communications and branding, changing signs and things, this is on the assumption that you go back to your original logos if there is indeed a de-amalgamation. I couldn't see how you could warrant or justify the expense of developing new logos for de-amalgamated councils. Staff expenditure, we've got some contracts to pay out potentially, maybe not necessarily. I've plugged the figures in there anyway. I want the worst case scenario. ICT, as I say, I had 4 figures to go from. This is the highest. I'm almost certain it will exceed. Although ICT tends to blow out, that's why I chose the highest figure, but I'm pretty certain you'll come under it. Governance costs. In all likelihood, most of them won't be incurred. What I'm thinking of particularly are things like audits at the end of the existence of the Cootamundra-Gundagai Regional Council. There would have to be an audit of financial statements. My proposal to the Boundaries Commission would be that de-amalgamation proclamation was read on the 1st of July, so it would happen at the end of the financial year, which the council would have to go through the audit process anyway as of 30th of June. And therefore we can A, mitigate this cost and avoid this cost, but B, avoid a lot of extra work for the council staff, and they'll have more than enough to keep themselves occupied with for the first 6 to 9 months anyway. So I think that would be the best move. Asset management is splitting that register has been done since you've been amalgamated. It's one of the enduring benefits of amalgamation, if there is indeed a de-amalgamation. Legal costs, it's almost certain an overestimate, rather be safe than sorry. Plant, I've been assured that each council has all the plant that they had at the time of the amalgamation, and they don't need any new plant directly as a result of a de-amalgamation. Transition manager, that's at current consulting rates for a person of that expertise. It will be worth every cent you pay for it if you get a good transition manager. It's a difference between a de-amalgamation being a success and it not being a success. Other is bits and bobs, comes to $1.75 million. So, where's the transition team? So, under my proposal, there would be an 8-week period leading up to the actual de-amalgamation date, where a team of staff and representatives would get together to make all the decisions, to do all the work that has to be done, so that on the 1st of July, 2 councils could commence operation. De-amalgamation is a less complex process than amalgamation, and many of these people went through the amalgamation, so we have a little bit of experience there in the first place. It's a way of keeping the community's democratic voice throughout the process, but also having a small enough group that we can actually manage and everyone can have a say and we can get the work done. Remember, these people will be meeting on a daily basis in all likelihood for 10 weeks. That's why I'm suggesting you only have your mayor and your deputy mayor there and not the whole council, because it's just not feasible to be dragging 7 extra people into the room every time you have to have a meeting, which could be several times during the day. So the members would be your current GM, of course he's on top of the current operations, your current mayor, who would represent the interests of the Gundagai community given that he hails from there, the current deputy mayor, who would be expected to represent the interests of the Cootamundra community given that he hails from there. They're the 2 senior councillors. It makes sense to pick the 2 senior councillors as representatives of your council. Your new general managers as soon as they were appointed, and this transition manager who's extremely important. So, why have a transition manager? Sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts to come to an agreement, to come to a consensus, there's going to be differences of opinions about where assets go, where staff go, where money goes, where liabilities go, and someone's got to be ultimately accountable to make a decision. You also need someone with the requisite knowledge and skills to be able to lead this process. It is a complex process, there's a lot of work to be done. There is no doubt in my mind, after studying previous de-amalgamations in Australia and abroad, that having a good transition manager, having a transition team, is the difference between success and failure for the communities that emerge from a de-amalgamation. The person needs to be truly independent, not be related to anyone down there, not to be particular friends of anyone down in Cootamundra-Gundagai. They need to know about de-amalgamation, and there's very few people in the country that do know about it because we've only had 5. They need to know about Cootamundra and Gundagai, about the communities, how they work, about staff members, know some of the staff members, know the key staff members, ideally already have a working relationship with them. They need to be someone that's prepared to consult, to seek agreement first. Much better to get a consensus than to have to make a unilateral decision. And indeed, we don't want it. The legislation, I'm proposing some legislation which will make this process a lot easier for the New South Wales government should they decide to do it. The legislation should specifically state that the transition manager is to seek consensus first before making a decision. That way we guarantee under law that your communities will have a voice through your mayor and deputy mayor. But at the end of the day, as I say, there will be some decisions where it won't be clear where a staff member should go because they're between 2 councils and they weren't there prior to amalgamation and they spend 50% time at each council. It's going to be those sorts of decisions where someone has to decide where the staff member goes. And that's your transition manager. Your other options is an administrator. You've had administrators in the past in Cootamundra-Gundagai. I think we've seen enough of administrators to think that we never want to see another one again. They weren't successful in a lot of situations. There were some excellent ones too, absolutely excellent ones. I know the one up in Armidale, Tylee, was very well regarded. But there's also the potential for disasters. But more importantly, an administrator doesn't have to consult with anyone. It's not ideal. We want this community to be in charge of its destiny. The other option is the minister, which is what Queensland had. Completely unworkable. The minister has her hands well and truly full. She won't necessarily have detailed knowledge of de-amalgamations anyway, or the Cootamundra-Gundagai community. She won't be able to devote the time necessary to a de-amalgamation. This is the best model, a transition team headed by a transition manager who gets the final say if there's disagreements that can't be resolved. So if the New South Wales government declines to do so, and as you know, under natural justice principles, I feel that the government should pay the one-off cost of de-amalgamation, not the ongoing cost, but the one-off cost. But if they decline to do so, who pays? In the past, it's been said that the breakaway council paid. That was what was said in the Delatite de-amalgamation. In actual fact, going through the financial statements, I found out they didn't pay at all. It was paid out of the pre-amalgamated entity, most of the cost. In Queensland, they've actually produced new legislation to bind the new council to costs incurred by the residual council, Sunshine Coast Regional Council. Now, that legislation could have been and probably should have been challenged in a place of law, because ordinarily it's very hard to bind an entity who doesn't exist in law to some costs that they have no say in. There's a huge, what economists call a moral hazard there, huge potential for someone to pass a lot of costs onto your new communities that you shouldn't be paying for. The most practical, the most efficient, the fairest thing is for the costs that are incurred by particular entities, for them to pay the cost. So for instance, in communications and branding costs, most of the rebranding gets done after amalgamation when you have 2 new councils. It's reasonable that they pay for their own branding costs. If they have to pay for their own branding costs, they're going to be very careful about those costs and they'll keep them down to a minimum. So it's much more efficient for that to happen. But there's another example where it would be better for the Cootamundra-Gundagai Regional Council to pay the cost. That would be in the case of ICT, computer equipment. Most of that work has to be done prior to de-amalgamation. It makes sense for the company engaging the contractor, negotiating the contract, to be paying for it. Once again, it makes them more accountable and makes the whole process more efficient. So I've listed down there when costs would be incurred, but basically the rule of thumb is when something's done, that's when it will be paid for. The transition manager, you'll see the first 8 weeks here by the Cootamundra-Gundagai Regional Council. The next 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks, Queensland didn't have someone after the de-amalgamation, and I think most people would agree that they should have had someone for a few weeks afterwards, just to bed down the whole arrangement. After de-amalgamation, the individual councils would share responsibility for the wages of that transition manager. Okay, well, just a quick reminder that I'm in town, Cootamundra, Monday night, 9th of March, for a community forum. I do encourage everyone to come. These are big decisions. They'll have a big bearing on your life. Please come. I'll have a short presentation, then I'll stand there all night and answer whatever questions you may have. On Tuesday, the 10th of March, I'll be in Gundagai doing the same thing. Look, if you see me around town during the day, which you probably won't see too much because I'll be mainly working with staff on the next projects that have to be done, please say hello. I'm very approachable and I'm happy to spend time with you. These are important decisions. If you know people aren't watching these videos, please encourage them to watch these videos, and I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible in a few weeks' time. Thank you.